April 9th, 1942. Before dawn in the Bay of Bengal, aboard the carrier Akagi, the flight deck is a black slab under a wet wind, salted with spray that clings to steel like cold sweat. Lanterns are hooded, voices are low, and yet the ship feels alive in the dark, a living machine breathing through vents and hatches. Somewhere below, aviation fuel stings the air. Above, the sky is an empty bowl of cloud, hiding the moon and making the ocean feel endless. On the flag bridge, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands with his staff, shoulders squared, face unreadable. He watches deck crews move like shadows, guiding torpedo bombers and dive bombers into position with small hand signals, careful steps, and discipline that never wastes motion. Every man knows what comes next. The strike will rise, skim out over gray water, and find the enemy where the enemy believes he is safe. Nagumo does not speak much, but the men around him do. They cannot help it. They have been winning for months, and victory has a sound. It is the crisp snap of orders obeyed instantly, the hum of engines that always start, the clean confidence that settles into a force when it has not been punished for believing in itself. Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, Nagumo's chief of staff, leans toward another officer and murmurs with a faint edge of amusement, as if savoring a private joke. The Americans, he suggests, still do not understand what has happened to the world. They call their defeats accidents. They blame luck. They shuffle commanders, issue new memos, rearrange titles. The Imperial Navy has read their transmissions when it can, studied their habits when it cannot. The pattern seems clear to the men on Akagi's slow decisions. Scattered forces, pilots trained for peacetime, admirals too cautious or too proud. At Pearl Harbor, they were caught sleeping. In the Philippines, they were pushed back step by step. In the Netherlands East Indies, they and their allies were crushed in the night waters of the Java Sea. In Tokyo, in the long corridors of Naval General Staff, reports have arrived like a drumbeat. Malaya, Singapore, Wake, Guam, Rabaul. Each name another notch carved into the belief that the enemy's leadership is soft. Even Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, who is more wary than most, has permitted himself a dangerous kind of optimism. He knows the United States is vast. He knows their industry is a forge that will burn hotter with time. But he also believes, and has said aloud, that morale is a weapon. If America's commanders can be shocked, embarrassed, made to look foolish again and again, the political will might fracture. A negotiated peace might become thinkable. Aboard Akagi, that hope takes on a sharper flavor contempt. Not screamed or shouted, but held behind the ribs, warming the blood. The deck officer calls out the first launch sequence. The carrier turns into the wind. The ship's bow lifts and falls, and the ocean seems to inhale and exhale along with it. When the first aircraft rolls, the engine's roar rips the quiet apart. The plane shudders, gathers speed, and then is gone, swallowed by darkness. One after another they rise, a chain of predators disappearing into cloud. The men on deck watch the tail lights vanish and feel the old certainty again. The enemy will not see them until it is too late. The enemy will react too slowly. The enemy will make the wrong choice at the wrong time. Like always, hours later, when news returns of enemy ships burning and harbors in chaos, the bridge becomes a chamber of restrained satisfaction. If anyone doubts, they doubt only the details. How many ships were hit? Which docks were destroyed? How long the enemy will be paralyzed? On other ships in Nagumo's striking force, the tone is the same. There is a confidence that has moved beyond professional pride and begun to harden into doctrine. They have carriers, the best in the world. They have pilots who have practiced until their hands move without thinking. They have a method for war in the Pacific, and it has not failed. Yet beneath that confidence is a fragile truth that few say out loud. Carriers are not battleships. They cannot absorb punishment and keep fighting. They are floating airfields, full of fuel, bombs, and aircraft packed tight. A single good hit can turn triumph into a furnace. Some officers know this too well, even in victory. They have seen near misses, felt the hull vibrate, imagined flame racing through hangar decks. They know the entire empire's reach, from island bases to sea lanes, is being held up by flight decks and trained air crews. In May, at Coral Sea, that reality will brush their skin. A Japanese carrier will be damaged. A precious carrier will be lost, for the first time. The enemy's carrier pilots will show teeth and draw blood, but many aboard the combined fleet will treat it as a warning with no teeth. A lesson for the Americans that still ends the same way. The talk at mess tables and in wardrooms drifts toward the next operation, the one meant to end the carrier threat entirely. Midway, a trap baited with an island and sprung with 4 fleet carriers. A decisive battle designed to finish what Pearl Harbor began. In the minds of many Japanese admirals, it is not only a plan, it is a verdict. The Americans will rush in, disorganized, led by men who still cannot see the board clearly. They will make mistakes again. They always do. And so, in the weeks before Midway, confidence settles over the carriers like a second skin. Beneath it, engines are serviced, bombs are stacked, and pilots rehearse the same attack patterns until they can fly them in their sleep. Out on the Pacific, the ocean waits, calm on the surface, hiding the moment when certainty will finally be tested by fire. June 4th, 1942, 0430 hours, North Pacific, northwest of Midway Atoll. The sea is steel gray, barely wrinkled, and the sky is the color of old ash. On Akagi, the wind is colder than it should be for summer, cutting through flight deck jackets and turning breath into a faint mist. Floodlights are masked. Men move quickly but carefully around lines of aircraft that wait like crouched animals. Nagumo's carriers turn into the wind again. Horns and whistles signal launch. The first wave for Midway begins to roll. A-6 M0s lift cleanly into the dim. D-3, A-dive bombers follow. Then B-5 and torpedo planes configured for level bombing. Engines roar, and the deck vibrates through the boots of the deck crews. In the air, the formation slides outward and disappears into the cloudy distance, heading for a small speck of coral that should be nothing more than bait. Below decks, ordnance teams watch the elevators rise and fall, ready to shift loads as soon as the first wave is gone. Bombs, torpedoes, ammunition, fuel. Everything that makes a carrier lethal also makes it fragile. They work in a careful rhythm learned over years. Not long after the launch, scout planes peel away in multiple directions. One of them, from the heavy cruiser Tone, lifts late due to a catapult delay. It is a small mistake, easily dismissed. The kind of thing victorious fleets shrug off, far away, across the ocean. American carriers wait where Japan does not expect them. Their presence is not an accident, and not luck. It is the product of leadership that has learned quickly and painfully, and of intelligence officers who have stared at intercepted messages until patterns emerged. On Akagi, those invisible decisions have no shape. They are just the empty horizon. Then Midway replies. Reports arrive of anti-aircraft fire, stubborn resistance, aircraft rising from the atoll. The strike leader requests a second attack. Nagumo receives the message, eyes narrowing. Midway is not suppressed. The island is still fighting. He turns to his staff. The reserve aircraft, already staged, can be armed either way. Torpedoes for ships, bombs for land. The fleet's doctrine expects American ships to appear, but Midway is still spitting bullets and smoke. He hesitates a moment that feels small in a room but will become enormous on a flight deck full of fuel. Nagumo orders the reserve to be rearmed for a second strike on Midway. In the hangars, men begin the dangerous work of change. Torpedoes are rolled back. Bombs are brought forward. Fuses are adjusted. The air smells of oil and sweat and the sharp chemical bite of aviation gas. It is controlled chaos, but it is still chaos. Minutes later, another message crackles in, a contact report from the late Tone Scout. First it is vague, then it sharpens. Enemy ships, carriers, possibly, for a second. The bridge is very still. Kusaka's earlier amusement is gone, replaced by the quick calculations of men who suddenly realize the board is not arranged the way they assumed. Nagumo reverses the order. Now the reserve must be armed for anti-ship strike. Torpedoes again. The bombs that were just rolled forward must be rolled back. It is not simply indecision. It is a man trying to do two necessary things in the same hour, while time closes like a fist. On the flight deck, the first wave begins to return from Midway. Many of them damaged. Planes come in low, wobbling, some with holes in wings, some trailing smoke. Landings start, urgent and messy. Deck crews drag aircraft clear, refuel, rearm, patch what they can. Every minute the deck is cluttered with machines that cannot be easily moved. Every minute, more fuel lines and bomb carts occupy the same narrow spaces. Then the Americans arrive. Not as a clean spear, but as a series of desperate blows. First come the torpedo squadrons, TBD devastators skimming just above the waves. They are slow, exposed, flying into walls of fire. Zeros slash down on them. Anti-aircraft guns hammer. One devastator after another falls into the sea, leaving brief splashes and floating debris. On the Japanese ships, men watch and feel a fierce relief. The Americans are brave. Yes, but their attacks are clumsy, almost suicidal. It looks like the old story again. Enemy leadership throwing lives away, but that is the trap. While the Zeros chase low targets and the guns are fixed on the waterline, the sky above the carriers opens. At 10:20, the cloud ceiling tears, and SBD dauntless dive bombers roll over and come down like falling tools. On Akagi, a lookout's shout turns into a scream. Dive bombers. High, straight overhead. Nagumo's deck is packed. Aircraft are fueled. Some are armed, others are half-armed, half rearranged, caught between orders. Torpedoes and bombs sit too close, like matches spilled beside gasoline. The first bomb hits near the aft elevator. The deck buckles. Fire blossoms instantly. A hard orange that does not flicker like campfire flame but punches outward, fed by fuel vapor and explosives. A second bomb detonates among aircraft, shattering aluminum and spraying burning gasoline across men who cannot outrun it. The blast lifts bodies and throws them down again. Akagi's air fills with smoke and the metallic taste of fear. In corridors below, sailors stumble in darkness, hands on bulkheads, choking as heat surges through ventilation. Fire parties rush forward with hoses that feel too small for what they face. Across the water, Kaga and Soryu are hit as well. Each carrier becomes a separate inferno, each one a fleet's worth of striking power turning into flames within minutes. On Hiryu, the last unhit carrier, officers watch the pillars of smoke and understand that the war has changed in one morning. They launch counterattacks, sending dive bombers and torpedo planes to find the American carriers. They succeed in damaging Yorktown. For a moment, it feels like the old balance might return, but American leadership does not flinch. Damage control crews on Yorktown fight like demons. Admirals decide quickly, accept risk, and keep their carriers in the fight. By afternoon, American dive bombers find Hiryu, and when Hiryu's deck erupts in flame, the combined fleet's confidence does not simply crack, it collapses. June 5th, 1942. 0 to 10 hours. North Pacific, drifting among burning wrecks. Night is a cold lid pressed down on the sea. The glow on the horizon is not sunrise. It is Kaga still burning, a red smear against low cloud, and Soryu farther off, coughing sparks like a dying forge. The ocean is scattered with debris and men in the water, some shouting, some too tired to make noise. The smell is a mixture of fuel, smoke, and something darker that clings to the throat. On Akagi, the ship is no longer a weapon. It is an emergency. Fire parties have fought for hours, hoses snaking through corridors slick with oil and water. Bulkheads are hot to the touch. Paint has blistered and peeled. The hangar is a blackened cavern where twisted aircraft frames lie in heaps. Every so often, ammunition cooks off with a dull thump, like the ship is still being hit. Nagumo stands amid this ruin with men who no longer talk about American incompetence. Their faces are gray with smoke residue, eyes red and glassy. Kusaka's voice is hoarse as he reads damage reports that sound like funeral notices. Steering impaired, fires out of control, flight operations impossible. The order to abandon ship comes later, spoken with a kind of reluctant finality. Officers attempt to maintain formality, but the sea does not respect ceremony. Sailors climb down nets into dark water, flinching as cold grips their bodies. Some glance back up at Akagi as if the ship might look ashamed. It does not, it simply burns. When Japanese destroyers move in to scuttle their own carrier, the torpedoes are not just metal in the water. They are the end of a myth. By morning, the ocean has swallowed the last of the fleet carriers that had carried Japan's offensive across the Pacific. 4 of them gone, and with them hundreds of trained pilots and deck crews. Not all, but enough. A wound that cannot be bandaged quickly. In Tokyo, the official language will try to make it less catastrophic. Losses are acknowledged in measured phrases. The public will not be told the full scale, but in the naval staff offices. Maps and force charts are updated with pencils that feel too heavy. The reality is arithmetic. Carriers are not only steel and engines, they are experienced air groups, maintenance crews, deck handlers, ordnance specialists, officers who can run flight operations under pressure, even if the hull can be built. The living skill that makes it dangerous is not poured from a mold. Japan can lay down new ships. Yes, it can convert hulls. It can accelerate construction. But every shipyard has limits. Every engine plant has bottlenecks. Every supply chain is strained by the empire's expanding perimeter. And pilots, the most precious part, cannot be replaced by decree. Before the war, Japanese naval aviation training was long and selective. Pilots who graduated were elite, but the pipeline was thin. They were made in small numbers, like blades forged by hand. Midway burned too many blades at once. In the weeks after Midway, Japanese admirals begin to speak differently, though not always openly. Some still cling to the old contempt, telling themselves the Americans merely got lucky, that one bad day does not define a war. But among the more honest men, a new fear emerges. Not panic, but a cold awareness. If the Americans can build faster than Japan can replace, then time is no longer neutral. Time becomes an enemy. Across the Pacific, American leadership moves with the kind of hungry focus that comes from realizing the opponent is wounded. Admiral Chester Nimitz does not waste the victory on celebration. He pushes forward. He knows the Japanese perimeter is wide, their supply lines long. He knows they must defend too much with too little. He also knows that carrier battles are now a contest of reserves, not only courage. American shipyards, untouched by bombing, are already turning raw steel into hulls with ruthless efficiency. Carriers are being launched in numbers Japan cannot match. More importantly, training systems expand. New pilots arrive, not as perfect craftsmen but as large waves of competent men. And the system keeps feeding more. This is where the imbalance begins to feel relentless. In August 1942, the Americans strike at Guadalcanal, a jungle island that becomes a meat grinder. Marines land, seize an unfinished airfield, and name it Henderson Field. Suddenly, the Solomons are not a distant outpost, but a knife pointed at Japan's supply routes. Japanese admirals respond with determination, but their options are already constrained. Their remaining carriers must be used carefully. Yet the campaign demands risk. Every convoy run, every reinforcement effort, every attempt to retake the island draws ships into reach of American aircraft. In late August, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons erupts. On the Japanese side, the carrier Shokaku survives. Zoikaku fights, and light carriers contribute. Their pilots are still skilled, still aggressive, and they inflict damage, but they also lose more experienced aircrew. Each loss now matters more than it did in 1941. At Santa Cruz in October, the Japanese win tactically, damaging American carriers and inflicting heavy losses. Japanese pilots perform with deadly precision. They hit Hornet hard enough to doom her. They damage Enterprise. For a few hours, the old confidence tries to return. But when the Japanese air groups come back, they come back thinner. Veterans are missing. Some squadrons are hollowed out. The carriers remain afloat, but their striking power bleeds away in the air. On the American side, the response is brutal in its simplicity. Replace the ships. Replace the planes. Replace the pilots. American leaders accept losses because their industrial base can swallow them and keep moving. Japanese leaders cannot. By early 1943, the Japanese carrier force is not dead, but it is changing into something weaker and more cautious. The hulls exist, but the air groups are not what they were. The training has been shortened to fill cockpits, and the result is a pilot corps that is larger but less lethal. This is the moment when the mocking stops, not because Japanese admirals suddenly respect American personalities, but because they begin to respect American systems. The enemy has learned, and the enemy can afford to learn in blood. And from this point forward, every carrier sortie for Japan carries a new shadow. If you lose it, you may not get it back. June 20th, 1944. Afternoon. Philippine Sea. East of the Marianas. Heat shimmers off the ocean like a thin veil. The water is a deep blue, calm enough to look harmless. But the sky above is busy with contrails and distant flashes. On the flight deck of the fleet carrier, Tai-Ho, men squint into the glare, hands raised to shield their eyes as aircraft circle to land. Engines whine, tires squeal, arresting wires snap taut and recoil. The deck crews move with urgency that borders on desperation. A lieutenant in a stained yellow vest points, palms out, guiding a returning fighter that wobbles slightly. Its pilot is young, his motions stiff, not quite smooth. The wheels touch, bounce, and slam down again. The hook catches. The aircraft jerks to a stop, and the pilot sits frozen for half a second as if he cannot believe he is alive. Tai-Ho is new, modern, and powerful. The kind of ship Japan hoped would restore what Midway took. But new steel does not erase old losses. What was burned away in 1942 and 1943 was not only ships, it was time, and the men who had learned how to fight from carrier decks when carrier warfare was still an art understood by few. Now the air groups are filled with replacements who have fewer hours, fewer landings, fewer chances to live through mistakes and learn from them. They are brave, and bravery is common. Experience is rare. In the carrier's island, admirals and staff officers watch the air picture form and dissolve across plotting boards. Their voices are controlled, but the strain shows in the way they repeat confirmations, in the sharpness of their corrections. They are fighting not only the Americans, but the creeping realization that the old edge is gone. This grind did not begin here. It began after Guadalcanal, after months of night battles and convoy runs, after the slow bleeding of veteran pilots at Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz. It deepened through 1943 when Japan tried to rebuild carrier air groups while also feeding the endless demands of the front. In those months, American leadership did something deceptively simple. It refused to let Japan recover. Submarines tightened around shipping lanes. Aircraft from growing island bases reached farther. The Allies took the initiative piece by piece, turning the Pacific into a series of controlled corridors where Japanese movement became predictable, and predictability became death. In 1944, the Americans push into the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Airfields there will bring Japan itself within bomber range. For Japan, this is not a battle over sand and palm trees. It is a battle over whether the war can be continued at all. So the combined fleet sails out. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa carries the responsibility now, commanding a carrier force that is larger on paper than the one that died at Midway, but not equal in soul. The plan relies on a long-range strike, on drawing the American carriers into a position where Japanese land-based aircraft can help. It is a plan shaped by shortage, a plan that tries to win without trading carriers blow for blow the way Yamamoto once imagined. Across the sea, American Task Force 58 moves like a steel storm. The carriers are many. Their screens are thick with cruisers and destroyers. Their radar reaches beyond sight. Their combat air patrols are layered, guided by controllers who speak pilots onto targets with calm precision. This is what Japanese admirals had mocked early in the war, the American love of procedure and coordination. Now those same qualities turn the sky into a trap. When Japanese strike waves finally arrive, they come in ragged groups, scattered by long distances and imperfect navigation. Young pilots glance down at compasses, then back up at an empty horizon, searching for the enemy that should be there. Fuel gauges sink toward red. Then the American fighters meet them. Hellcats roll in from above, heavy, fast, and confident. They do not fight like the Americans of 1942. They fight like hunters trained by 2 years of constant combat, backed by gunnery practice, replacement pools, and a system that has refined tactics until they are almost automatic. A Japanese pilot, barely older than a boy, sees tracers reach for him and jerks his stick hard. His aircraft shudders. The canopy flashes with sunlight. Another second and his wing is torn open, the engine coughing black smoke. He tries to turn toward home, but home is hundreds of miles away, and the ocean below is waiting. On Taiho, officers hear fragments of radio calls, panicked voices, broken transmissions, then silence. The phrase that will later be spoken by Americans, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, is not heard on the Japanese decks. Here it is simply annihilation, experienced in real time as the air group disappears. And then, as if the sky's slaughter is not enough, the sea delivers its own blow. A single American submarine, USS Albacore, slips into position and fires torpedoes at Taiho. One hits. The impact is a deep, sickening thud that travels through the hull like a punch to the stomach. The carrier does not immediately list badly. Damage control teams rush to contain flooding. At first it seems survivable, but the torpedo ruptures fuel tanks. Gasoline vapor spreads through compartments. The ship's ventilation moves it like an invisible enemy, pushing it into spaces where sparks and hot surfaces exist everywhere. Officers order fans running, trying to clear fumes, but the effort only helps the vapor spread. Hours later, Taiho becomes a bomb. The explosion is immense, a sudden rising roar that lifts the flight deck and tears it open. A column of smoke and flame climbs into the sky. Men are thrown against bulkheads, slammed to the deck, flung into the air. The carrier that was meant to symbolize Japan's renewal is transformed into wreckage. Nearby, another Japanese carrier, Shokaku, is also struck and doomed. More steel, more flight deck space, more hope. Lost to torpedoes and fire, Ozawa watches his force shrink in a single day, not only in ships, but in the air crew that cannot be replaced. Again, the pattern is now unmistakable. The Americans do not need perfection. They need pressure. They keep it constant every time Japan risks its carriers. The risk is existential. Every time America risks its carriers, the loss is painful but temporary. The imbalance that began at Midway has matured into a machine, and Japanese admirals, who once spoke of American errors as inevitabilities, now confront a different inevitability. Not that America will blunder, but that America will keep coming, with more ships, more pilots, and leaders who know exactly how to spend them. October 25th, 1944. Dawn, off Cape Angano, northeast of Luzon. The sea is dark and restless, and the horizon is a thin line of bruised purple. On the carrier Zuikaku, the last surviving fleet carrier that had struck Pearl Harbor. Sailors stand at their stations with faces that look older than their years. The ship rolls gently, but no one relaxes with the motion. The air is tense in a way that is different from 1941. Then, they had felt invincible. Now, they feel hunted. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's force steams north with a mission that is both bold and desperate. His carriers are not here to win a carrier duel in the old sense. They are here to be seen. They are bait. Far to the south, in the chaos of the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf, Japanese surface forces are trying to reach the American invasion fleet. Ozawa's carriers are meant to pull American fast carriers away, to drag them north like a lure dragged across water. The plan is the kind that only exists when options have been stripped down to bones. A fleet carrier without an air group is not a sword. It is a flag and a sacrifice. On Zuikaku's deck, aircraft are lined up, but not in the dense, confident rows of earlier years. The available planes are fewer. The pilots who climb into cockpits are often young, some with eyes that avoid meeting anyone else's. There are veterans still, but too few, and they carry the weight of everyone who did not make it back from Midway. Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea. A petty officer checks a tie-down chain with hands that shake slightly. He forces them steady. He has served on this ship since before the war. He remembers the noise and pride of that first great strike. Now the metal under his fingers feels like a relic. Ozawa knows what he is doing to them. He also knows what the Americans will do in response. American leadership, by 1944, is no longer reacting. It is shaping the battlefield. It is deciding where the decisive weight will fall, and then applying it with overwhelming force. Task Force 38 sees the Japanese carriers and turns north. The American pilots launch in waves, their aircraft filling the morning sky. Hundreds of planes, coordinated by radar, controlled by experienced strike leaders. They have fuel reserves. They have replacement planes waiting on decks. They have escorts thick enough to make the horizon bristle. On Zuikaku, the first warning is distant thunder. Then the sky begins to fill with specks that grow larger with every second. The Japanese combat air patrol rises, but it is thin. A handful of fighters climbing hard, trying to gain altitude, trying to position for a defense they know is inadequate. Radio calls overlap. Someone shouts bearings. Someone else screams for more altitude. Another voice simply curses, the sound raw with frustration. Then the attack hits. American dive bombers tilt over and come down in clean lines. Rockets flash. Bombs fall. The first detonation punches into the flight deck, sending fragments of steel and wood into the air. Men are thrown flat. Fires ignite where fuel lines split. Another bomb hits near an elevator, buckling the deck and trapping aircraft in the hangar like animals in a burning pen. Anti-aircraft guns hammer upward, throwing up black bursts that look impressive, but cannot stop the mass. A gun crew on the starboard side works until the barrel glows. their ears ringing, their mouths open as they shout into the wind. A strafing run cuts across them and several men collapse without a sound, their bodies rolling with the ship's motion. Zuikaku lists as flooding spreads. Damage control teams fight the fires with hoses and foam, but the flames multiply. Smoke pours from vents and hatches. The air becomes unbreathable. The ship that once carried the pride of the Imperial Navy now feels like a dying animal, wounded and surrounded. As the morning progresses, more hits land. Torpedoes slam into the hull, shaking the entire ship with each impact. The list becomes worse. Water rushes through compartments. Men struggle to close hatches, to shore up bulkheads, to keep the ship alive long enough to matter. On the bridge, officers watch the line of the horizon tilt. They report calmly, because that is what officers do. But their faces are pale. The end comes in stages. First, the order to prepare to abandon ship. Then the realization that there is little left to save. Then the final moment when the carrier rolls farther, the deck tilting like a collapsing stage, and men begin to slide, grabbing at railings, at ropes, at anything. Zuikaku capsizes and sinks. The last Pearl Harbor carrier is gone. The loss is not merely symbolic. It is the closing of an era. The Japanese carrier force, once the sharpest blade at sea, has been reduced to scattered light carriers, conversions, and training ships pressed into combat. Japan still has hulls, still has aircraft, but the core is gone. And in the wake of those losses, a new use for carriers emerges, one that would have been unthinkable in 1941. They become platforms for missions that do not expect return. Kamikaze attacks begin to appear, not as single events, but as a system of desperation. Young pilots take off, knowing the landing gear is irrelevant. Their aircraft carry bombs meant to detonate on impact. Their target is not the enemy's air group, but the enemy's will. The hope that shock can do what shipbuilding and training no longer can. American leadership, however, has anticipated this kind of escalation. It adjusts tactics, strengthens screens, improves radar pickets, refines combat air patrol procedures. It is not immune to the horror of suicide attacks. And ships are damaged, sailors killed, decks turned into scenes of flame and screaming. But the American machine absorbs the blows and keeps moving. In Japan's fleet headquarters, the language has changed completely from the early days of mocking the Americans. Now the conversations are about survival, about stretching fuel, about whether the next operation can be attempted at all. The truth is stark. The carrier losses have become irreplaceable not because Japan lacks courage, but because Japan cannot regenerate the combined package of ships, aircraft, trained pilots, and fuel. The Americans can. And that is why American leadership presses harder, faster, with less hesitation. It understands that every month that passes, the imbalance widens. April 7th, 1945. Morning. East China Sea, south of Kyushu. The battleship Yamato cuts a dark line through choppy water, a mountain of steel that throws spray like shattered glass. Her escorts struggle to keep station. The sky is pale and deceptively calm, but it feels watched. It feels owned by someone else. There are no fleet carriers with her. Not in the old sense. Not in the way the combined fleet once moved. Covered by wide circles of fighters, backed by disciplined strike waves that could reach out and smash anything that threatened the formation. Yamato sails with a mission that is almost the same as Ozawa's had been at Cape Engano, a one-way mission, Operation 10. Go is desperation put into naval order. The plan is to run Yamato to Okinawa, beach her, and turn the battleship into a stationary gun platform. It is a plan that admits what Japanese admirals had once refused to believe. The sea is no longer their battlefield to shape. It belongs to American carriers, out over the horizon. Task Force 58 is already in motion. American reconnaissance finds Yamato early. Messages pass quickly through radio circuits that have become fast and efficient through hard experience. Decisions follow without hesitation. Launch. On American flight decks, engines start in coordinated waves. Hellcats, Helldivers, Avengers, deck crews run, point, kneel, stand, all in practiced choreography. Pilots taxi forward, canopies down, faces unreadable behind goggles. They are not improvising. They are executing a system that has been built to do this again and again. Within hours, the sky above Yamato fills. The first attack arrives like weather. Dive bombers fall out of the sun. Torpedo planes skim low over the waves. Fighters strafe gun positions and rake decks with bullets. Yamato's anti-aircraft batteries erupt, a forest of tracers and flak bursts. The ship shakes under her own fire. The air becomes thick with smoke and fragments. A torpedo hits, then another. The impacts are heavy, deep blows that make the battleship's immense hull tremble. Flooding spreads. The ship begins to list on Yamato's deck. Sailors run with hoses and stretchers. Men shout over the roar. Some slip on blood and seawater. Others brace themselves against the tilt, grabbing railings as the deck becomes a slope. More strikes come, always more. This is the final form of the imbalance that began at Midway. American leadership has learned to apply air power like a hammer, and it now possesses so many hammers it can afford to keep swinging until nothing moves. There is no moment for Yamato's commanders to hope that the Americans will misjudge, or that an error will open a gap. That error is gone. The Americans do not need to be brilliant in a single stroke. They only need to be consistent. They find, they launch, they strike, they repeat. Yamato's list becomes severe. Her speed drops. Her guns still fire. But each salvo feels more like defiance than tactic. The escorts are in chaos, dodging torpedoes, smoking, burning, some already sinking. The sea is littered with oil and debris. At 14:23, Yamato's end arrives in a convulsion that seems to split the sky. A massive internal explosion erupts, lifting a mushroom of smoke and flame thousands of feet high. The battleship breaks and rolls, and then the ocean swallows her. The shockwave reaches aircraft in the air. Pilots feel it through controls and airframes. Some glance down and see the greatest battleship in history vanish like a stone dropped into a black lake. For Japan, it is more than a loss of steel. It is the closing of a story that began with carriers and ended under carrier aircraft. Back in the beginning, when Japanese admirals mocked American leadership, they were really mocking an America that had not yet found its rhythm. They saw scattered responses. They saw cautious commanders. They saw mistakes that looked like habit. But the war did not allow America to remain that way. After Midway, American leadership exploited the carrier imbalance relentlessly, not by chasing glory, but by managing resources. It targeted fuel and shipping. It built bases that extended air cover. It rotated damaged carriers back to repair and brought fresh ones forward. It trained pilots in volumes Japan could not match. It replaced losses as a matter of schedule. Japan, meanwhile, tried to hold a perimeter too wide for its remaining carriers to cover. It shortened training to fill cockpits and paid the price in the air. It lost veteran after veteran until tactics that once felt effortless became dangerous guesses. Every time Japan risked a carrier, it was risking its future. By 1944, Japanese carriers were used as bait at Cape Engano because the remaining air groups could no longer win the old kind of battle. By 1945, the fleet sailed on missions that assumed death, because even survival offered no path back to parity. And so the mockery died. Not in a speech, not in a single dramatic surrender of pride, but in the quiet way staff officers stopped laughing at American decisions, in the way their briefings shifted from confidence to calculation, from contempt to dread. On the American side, leadership became a weapon that kept sharpening itself. Not perfect, not free of mistakes, but adaptive and relentless, supported by an industrial base and a training pipeline that turned time into power. In the end, that is what made the carrier losses irreplaceable for Japan. It was not only that ships sank, it was that the world that produced those ships and the men who made them deadly could not be rebuilt fast enough while the enemy kept pressing. The Pacific War ends with Japanese decks empty and American decks crowded. Aircraft lined up wingtip to wingtip, ready for another launch. The sea is still the same sea, but the balance upon it has been decided.